This is the Dallas Morning News.
Eat, Drink, DFW from the Dallas Morning News is made possible by Central Market.
Hello, and welcome to Eat, Drink, DFW, the podcast from the Dallas Morning News food team. Each week, we take a look at food and drink trends in North Texas, talk about restaurants in Dallas-Fort Worth, learn some new recipes, and sometimes even get tips from you, our listeners. I'm Anna Butler, the Dallas Morning News' food editor. Today, we have a special guest joining us. Longtime Texas restaurant veteran Andre Natura will be in the studio answering our questions and sharing some unwritten rules and insider knowledge of the industry. That's all coming up right after this.
Central Market is really into food. Like when we say cheese, it's in 12 languages into food. Butchers, bakers, and sushi roll makers into food. We're talking so obsessive about quality you can shop blindfolded into food. Central Market is really into food. If you are too, then let us turn your shopping list into a treasure map. Get inspired, get adventurous, or just get a chef-made dinner when you've got more taste buds than time. No place makes every meal more amazing like Central Market. Really into food. Shop now at centralmarket.com.
For the latest food and restaurant news in Dallas-Fort Worth, visit dallasnews.com/food. Also, we'd love to hear from you, so email us at eatdrink@dallasnews.com. Today, I am joined by our food writers, Sarah Blaskovich and Imelda Garcia, and a special guest, Andre Natura. Andre has a 27-year culinary career cooking with some of the best and includes restaurant experience in both Austin and Dallas. Andre now hosts a podcast, Chef's PSA, focused on helping chefs in the making with personal and professional growth within the culinary communities. He's also an avid mentor. Andre, what did I miss?
No, you got it all. You said more. I didn't know I did all that. I think at one point, because I used to chef here in Dallas, I think at one point, only because I'm going to brag, I think I was 2011 and 2012 on their Dallas Morning News Best Chefs.
Oh, fantastic. We listed you in 2011 and 2012 among our city's best chefs.
Should have been 2013, 14, 15. And so on, but who's complaining?
Yeah, right. And remind us, Chef, which Dallas restaurants?
When I was here, I was chef at Pyramid, and that was the first time that I received recognition. And then we were at Marquee, which then transitioned into Tokovi and Village Kitchen.
Yes, and Chef, I've been watching your career since then and eating your food, and it's been cool to watch you have a podcast now. I know you moved to Austin, but we still get to hear from you and hear from other chefs about what they're doing in our state. And I was listening to your podcast, and you were talking with Dallas chef Junior Borges about trends in fine dining food. I was actually on a walk and listening to this podcast, and I was like, oh my gosh, we have to have Chef Andre on to talk about this very one specific thing you said. I stopped in my tracks, and you said, quote, "Food is all starting to feel the same," unquote. And this is something I've thought about, but couldn't articulate quite as succinctly as you did. So let's start here. What did you mean by food is all starting to feel the same?
I like to call it the Instagramification of food. So we're all looking at the same Instagram chefs and restaurants coast to coast. So if I would say the example, LA, New York, Wisconsin, Austin, Texas, Dallas, Texas, we're all kind of cooking the same and all the food's starting to look the same. And in order to get a certain amount of recognition, you know exactly what you need to post because everyone's going to like it, everyone's going to share it, and everyone's going to comment on it. But it feels just like everything else. And is it pretty? Yes. Is it delicious? Probably. But is it original? I don't know. That's a different conversation.
And so I think as a creative person, there's a problem here, right? That's worrisome that food is all starting to feel the same.
And, you could make the argument that if you want to stand out, you have to be original, but there's also an incentive structure built around social media.
Well, and I was thinking with this social media concept that if you essentially don't cook pretty food, are you really just cutting yourself off?
There's definitely a game being played, but I think when you go back before Instagram and Facebook became a thing, and really Instagram, because I think that's really where it's at, especially when you want to look at beautiful food. If you look at the old Dallas Morning News, and I'm just using, because we're here, the old food reviews, there was maybe one or two photos of the food, headshot of the chef, standing with a knife or his arms crossed or her arms crossed. And you had to read to know what the food was like. Was it delicious? And ultimately, that's what you were being judged on. The chefs years ago were not necessarily being judged on what did the food look like. That put a lot more focus on making things delicious, making sure the hospitality was there in the restaurant. And I'm not sure if that is still the same incentive that the chefs have. Because now, if you get a lot of likes for making something, you start to play the game a little bit and you start cooking to the audience, but it does feel like, I like to say, it's like chef thirst traps. They're cooking because they want to put it out there. It's going to look pretty. They're going to get a lot of likes, but it just feels kind of shallow.
Don't you think this opens a double debate, so to speak? For example, there are little places that now have an opportunity to be showcased there and to be known. It's a double thing, you know?
Yeah, and like I said, there is a little bit of a game being played by a lot of the chefs because there's a business aspect to it. You want to fill up your restaurant. You want to create awareness around the food that you're doing. I'll just use this as an example. If you go on Instagram and you start following chefs and you hit the explore page and you want to see a bunch of food, what you're going to see is a lot of similar looking food, whether we're talking crudos or duck or some sort of dish with broken white sauce with green oil, it all starts to look the same. I promise you there's a lot more on the menu than that. They're not showing everything else on the menu. They're just showing you what they think is probably going to get the most amount of likes and the most amount of attention. But why would I go to Wisconsin or New York or LA if I could get that exact same food where I'm at? If I could get it in Austin or if I could get it in Dallas, I don't need to go to LA to get the exact same thing. And I think where the trouble really starts to face the chefs is, how are you going to stand out and be original? And is the food delicious? At the end of the day, are you making delicious food because that's what's going to keep people coming back? Because once the photo wears off and once you take the first bite, the beauty is over. And after that, is it delicious? And do I want to have a second bite? And would I bring people back here because the food is so good?
It's interesting because I think we're evoking something that we've talked about a little bit in the Michelin conversation, where what is Dallas food if we're also sitting there and just trying to cook and imitate the food of other places?
Yes, and I think that's what you meant, Chef, by these thirst traps. The broth with the green dots in it, for instance. Can you name just a couple other things that those of us eating around town will see? What else is like the Instagram photo you gotta have if you're a quote unquote good restaurant?
Right, so you gotta have the, maybe it's some sort of crudo with some beautiful shaved vegetables on it that probably don't taste great.
Okay.
Why are they raw?
Right, and that's kind of the thing is sometimes as a young chef, you start to think, how can I make this beautiful before you think, how can I make it delicious? And I understand we're playing the game, but at the end of the day, it has to taste good. So the overabundance of shaved raw vegetables or the overabundance of herbs that aren't necessarily improving the dish, but they look pretty. Back in the day, as chefs, we used to say, it has to pop, like make sure it pops. And now I think food is just popping too much, but it's falling flat.
Yeah, like everybody wants to be a 10 out of 10. And
Right.
It's like, you can have some great dishes that look fine.
What people don't understand, and I'm going to use some great chefs as an example. If you look at the Thomas Kellers of the world or the Ferran Adria, the Enrique Olveras, they were cooking their food. And if you saw it, you'd say, that's Thomas's food, or that's Enrique's food, or that's Ferran Adria's food. But now if you look at something, you're like, well, whose food is that? I don't know. I'm going to give a shout out to someone that's a friend of mine here in Dallas, Anastasia Quinones. And she was just on my podcast as well. And when I see her food, I know it.
Yeah,
She has a certain style to it.
totally agree.
And when I see it, it's like, I know it. I know exactly what her food is like. And Junior Borges is another former Dallas chef. He's still kind of here. But when I see his food, I can say, that's Junior's food. I know what that looks like. But a lot of other chefs that want to grab a little bit of attention, they're going to start saying, who can I replicate versus how can I stand on my own too and be original?
So that makes me wonder, what would food look like if there was no Instagram and if chefs weren't cooking for a James Beard Award and now in Texas for a Michelin star?
Well, that's an excellent question. And I thought about this for quite some time. I stayed up at night, drinking lots of coffee and thinking, how would I solve this issue? And as simple as the idea is it would probably look like what food used to look like before we had Instagram. Where it was not so much about making sure you check all the boxes so it'll go viral on social media. It was more about, is it going to be delicious? And are people going to come back and talk about how delicious that gnocchi is or how delicious that mole is or that steak or whatever it is that you're cooking? And I want to mention something about Michelin, and I don't know if I'm getting ahead of myself, but what Michelin is screaming with the most recent awards by awarding barbecue restaurants and a taco restaurant in Mexico and what they've done in Singapore is what they're saying is food has to be excellent, period. And are you delivering the most excellent version of that type of food? So it's not necessarily, it has to have a white tablecloth and it doesn't have to have, the most expensive stemware. Are you the best in class in a specific type of cuisine that you're doing? And if people are not paying attention to that, because Michelin is saying this, James Beard is saying this, World's 50 Etxebarri in Spain won a couple of years ago as the #1 restaurant. If you look at their food, it's not overly complex and overly garnished. It's relatively simple. So what all of these awards are saying is that, are you delivering the best version of what you're trying to do?
That's so interesting that you say that because I think you're right. Although with Michelin being in Texas, it smacks to me as everything needs to be more beautiful, more expensive, more tasting menus, more interesting. And I think your challenge is no, it doesn't. It needs to be from the point of view of the chef. And hopefully Michelin and James Beard and 50 Best can see the difference between the fussed up plate with edible flowers on it from the plate that tastes truly great.
Now let's use 11 Madison Park in New York as an example.
Okay.
So at one point they're the number one restaurant. They're a 3 Michelin star restaurant. And then what do? They go from, I don't know, 1 million courses down to 5. That was a very gutsy thing that they did.
Yep.
So, and then they also said, and we're also going to do vegetarian or vegan.
Yeah, which was
right?
wild.
And they're still able to do that confidently. And I think that's what people are missing is they said, we don't need to do what everyone else is doing. We're going to do what we do with confidence, and you're going to appreciate it. And we're going to cook with intention to deliver our unique voice as 11 Madison Park. And as the world changes and as the diners' expectations change, no one wants to be in a dinner setting for more than 3 hours or 4 hours.
I agree with that.
It gets too long.
Yep.
I don't need 20 courses. And I joke about this often is I've never been to a 14-course tasting menu. Be like, oh, that'd be better if it was 15. No one ever says that. If you could give me a delicious experience in 2.5 hours, which I think is what 11 Madison is now aiming for, with about 5 to 7 courses, why couldn't you be the best restaurant in the world? And I think pushing these paradigms and challenging what was the status quo before, Michelin is saying, we will recognize that. World's 50 Best is saying, we will recognize that. But I think the chef community is slow to say, will you really? I don't know. I feel like I still got to check all the boxes.
I feel like that in particular came across with the results from Tex-Mex because I think we thought we'd see more Tex-Mex on that Michelin list, at least recommended. And so I'm like, do they get it? Does it need to be chefed up more? And I don't want to eat chefed up Tex-Mex.
What do you think about that, Chef? Did they whiff on Tex-Mex, or do you think they don't get it like Anna is suggesting and I agree with?
It might be a little bit of both. I haven't really thought about that until today, but I would say, is there anyone doing Tex-Mex exceptionally better than everyone else? Or does it all kind of feel the same? So if it all kind of feels the same, it's hard to point out who's doing it exceptionally well.
Fair.
Chef, do you think we are going to see a new wave of diners on Instagram looking for more authenticity maybe?
I think as we evolve, and I'm very fortunate in the position where I do have a podcast and I have a large audience and I could speak to this. So I know I'm planting seeds deliberately. And I'm doing a guest chef dinner, I think May 18th. And I've been talking a lot of mess about this, what we're talking about today. And so I was like, I got to put my money where my mouth is. The majority of my career as a chef, I was that chef with the tweezers and very intricate and beautifully plated food. And with this dinner that I'm doing, I'm like, how can I make it delicious first? And so something as simple as like strawberries and cream or just braised artichokes, and it's delicious. And so I went and did my R&D the other day for these dishes. And as I was trying it, I was like, yep, I could confirm that I am right. Was it the most beautiful food I've ever made? Absolutely not. And I wouldn't even share these photos on Instagram. It was that level of just not pretty.
Sure.
But it was probably some of the most delicious food I made because there was no ego in it. And my sole purpose when I was making that food was make it delicious. And one of the people that I was presenting the food to, they said, that tastes comforting like a hug. And I was like, yes, that's exactly what I want.
Okay, and that makes me want to ask you a follow-up question. When you're cooking at home, so not for a chef's dinner, can you think of a dish that you make that is not beautiful, but is so delicious that you don't care? And I ask this question because everybody listening has been to restaurants that make beautiful food. And then all of us go home, or most of us go home and make food that's not beautiful, but that we like. And, I'm not a chef, for instance, and I feel good about a dish that tastes good. What's your taste good dish?
Well, it's not necessarily a taste good dish, but I'll tell you, it's a taste good method.
Okay.
And that's something braised.
All right.
And when you put some meat in a pot, whether it's beef, short ribs, or maybe it's, coq au vin, or maybe it's chicken, or maybe it's a mole, and you cook it slowly, it's delicious and it's layered and it's comforting. And it's not the most beautiful thing because it's saucy and it's messy and you might have tortillas or you might have bread or it's over rice. It takes you back. And it tastes nurturing and it tastes loving because that's the way that we used to cook. But is it beautiful? Probably not. But it's the most delicious thing. So I'll just digress into a quick story. Is I was in a cooking competition years ago. And I remember I wanted to make the most complicated, beautiful dish. And I did a sphere and it had jellies and it had gels and it was just crazy. And I was like, there's 100 techniques and I'm going to blow everyone away. And the person that beat me did a braised dish. And I was so upset because I was like, it's just a braised dish. I remember speaking to that chef afterwards, very upset that how did I lose this competition when I had so much to show? And he says, nothing you could ever do will be more comforting than a braised dish. And I was like, it stuck with me. And he was so right at that moment. And I think about that a lot more, is that it's delicious, it's flavorful, it's comforting, and it's what you want to eat when no one's around. You don't ever wake up in the middle of the night and say, ooh, I really am craving that broken white sauce with green oil. You don't ever say that.
Yeah, right.
But you're craving that braised, that something that your mother made or your grandmother made.
That's an excellent answer. And I think everybody who listens to our podcast might go home and braise a dish tonight because of it.
Braising is also the number one thing I cited when I said I never wanted to have a roommate again, because you can't be a good roommate and also take over the oven for like 7 hours.
Yeah.
Like, you just can't do it.
That's great. Okay, I also want to talk about Michelin trends. You said you created a spreadsheet years ago of Michelin-starred restaurants so you could find commonalities between the apparent best restaurants in the country. You talked about this on Chef's PSA. I thought it was so fascinating. More recently, you asked ChatGPT to synthesize themes between all 3-star Michelin restaurants. So first question, why did you do that?
Well, so I had spoken about it on the podcast, and what I did was the restaurant that I was overseeing at the time, Garrison, had received a Forbes Travel Guide 4-star rating, which I think was maybe 1 or 2 in Texas that received it. And I wanted to get 5. When we got our audit back, we noticed we missed it by like 3 points. So we were extremely close.
Oh, they give you those notes.
They give the notes and said, this is where you missed points.
That's enough to drive you crazy.
Perfect. Enough to drive you perfectly insane. So what I did was I created a list of all the Forbes 4 and 5-star restaurants and all the Michelin 1, 2, and 3-star restaurants, and wanted to see what they had in common from how many courses did they serve, what's the price point, are they tasting menu and a la carte? And what you find is like a lot of them start at the 4 and 1-star level that are tasting and a la carte. And when you get to the 3-star menu, it's only tasting.
Right.
And so you start to see price points start to increase. The size of the wine list starts to increase, the type of stemware that they're using or the style of service. And you start to see these common threads. And I was like, okay, I was looking at it from the game. I think there was a restaurant in Dallas that had 5 stars. Like, I want to be the only other restaurant that has 5 stars. So I was like, this is what we're missing. This is exactly what we're going to do. So I was playing the game, and I understood like, okay, I can make delicious food, but can I win the game? That's the chef ego talking. The reason that came up again was because I spoke about this on the podcast, and a lot of chefs started reaching out to me like, hey, can you send me that spreadsheet? And so as I started digging for it, I realized I don't have it anymore. I think I probably left it at the job.
I asked you that too.
You did.
I'm like, hey, I want to see that.
Right. So I was like, well, it shouldn't be that difficult to do. And that spreadsheet back then probably took me like 3 months to create.
Ooh.
It was a lot of research, a lot of internet. And this time around, I just created a prompt in ChatGPT, put it in there. Now ChatGPT, has the deep research, and it didn't give me all the information I need, but it got me pretty close with a simple prompt to give me all the information to see many commonalities and themes between, the 1, 2, and 3-star restaurants. And
what did you learn from that? Anything applicable or just crazy stuff?
I think what I learned, it's kind of what I'm talking about right now. Some of the 3-star restaurants, when you start getting into the world of excellence, they're unique. And they tell a story, whether it's time and place or the personality of their chef. It's more than just the food. There's a connection to it. And I think chefs need to remember, like, yes, there's a certain level of technique that goes into everything that you make, but there's also a certain level of you that needs to be expressed in the food. You could tell me it's right or wrong. You might not like it, but that's exactly what I was trying to do. And that's my signature on the dish, or that's my signature on the service, or the restaurant has this feel because that's the music I used to listen to when I was growing up, and I want you to feel that. But what ends up happening is a lot of chefs or restaurateurs, they start saying, no, let's just kind of make it vanilla for everybody instead of making it something special and unique.
That makes me think of 2 major pieces of news that we had this week that dovetail exactly with what you're saying. We saw that Chef AQ, a Dallas chef, is now going to open her own restaurant. And we have a story on that on dallasnews.com/food. Same day, earlier this week, we reported that Tatsu, our only 1-star Michelin restaurant, is now going to spawn a second restaurant on the same Deep Ellum property, where they're going to do a different style of Japanese restaurant, one that somehow won't compete with the place next door. I think you could make the argument that both of those chefs are unique in the way that ChatGPT suggested we need.
Exactly. And here's something that I'll share with your audience. Because of what I do with the podcast, within the past few months, especially with Michelin being here, I have had so many investors reach out, wanting to open up great high-level restaurants in Texas. So not just Dallas, but San Antonio, Austin, Houston, just trying to get let me pick your brain a little bit. What do you think of this concept? So what I find really fascinating about that is the first round of Michelin definitely piqued the chef's interest, but it also piqued the financial world's interest and saying, okay, we want to flex too. We want to have that restaurant that says we got this star, that star. And they're starting to scout around a little bit and say, what building do we need to be in? Which chef do we need to partner with? So a lot more is happening behind the scenes than I think people realize.
And are you seeing people throw around some dumb money that maybe they shouldn't, chef?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
I mean, as a potential consultant, somebody who kind of knows maybe where you should or where you shouldn't, some of these are shouldn'ts.
Yeah, some of them are shouldn't, some of them are shoulds. And I think the biggest lesson for anyone listening would be know what city you're in and what does that city need? Not necessarily what you think it needs, but what does the city really need and what are they going to respond to? And make sure it hasn't been tried before and it just didn't work. Because I think a lot of times we kind of force our ideas, but no one's asking for it.
I think you're right.
Yeah.
One last question. You suggested to me something I took pretty seriously, that journalists have an important responsibility to play. What worries you as a chef when you read about restaurants in the news?
You have to be very careful what you're incentivizing, because every young chef, every aspiring chef, every chef that is thinking that their restaurant is struggling and wants to bring it back to life is looking at what journalists write. And if you say, this is it, they're going to start saying, well, if I could bring my restaurant back to life, or if I want a little bit of shine, I'm going to start doing exactly what you're saying. I think sometimes I want to say something, but like, I don't want to call out any chef specifically, but I've seen articles where the food looked really bad. And I read it. I was like, I know the food is bad as a chef. And it's not Dallas Morning News, but it was someone else. And then what ended up happening is a lot of people started copying that because they think, oh, if that's what's getting recognition, then let me do more of that. So sometimes a lot of chefs are playing that game also, thinking, okay, we need to keep our doors open. So let's do what the media is awarding attention to. And it might not necessarily be good. So I think that journalists, food writers, and people that are giving out restaurant awards need to be very thoughtful when they do so, because if the food is not good, what it's going to produce is a lot more bad food.
I think you've made an excellent point this whole time that number 1, 2, and 3 is that the food needs to taste good.
Yeah.
The other stuff, the $10 million decor, the expensive wallpaper, the pretty plates, those can come or not.
It's reminding me of how with the Academy Awards this year, they're actually requiring everyone to watch a movie before they vote in a category where it's like, hey, what if you actually tasted the food before you just wrote about it?
Right. And I would use this as an example for the audience. If you've seen the first Indiana Jones movie, and there's a scene in there where he's going to fight someone and the guy has a sword and he's swinging it around and he's putting on the big show and there's tension building in the movie and you think, is Indiana Jones going to die? And then Indiana Jones pulls out a gun and shoots him. And I think that's where we've gotten to with food, is we're pulling out the sword and we're swinging it around and we're putting on this big show, but is it good? That's the point, is like the shortest path to get to the most delicious result. You don't need all the bells and whistles. If you look at addition, you know, I've talked about this with another chef, is that if you take a sous vide piece of meat and you've covered it with a layer of a mousse or a farce, as we call it, and you've put a beautiful tuile on it, and you have a beautiful quenelle of a puree next to it, and you've spent 8 hours making this one perfect dish, it won't taste as good as a steak with a crust on it.
Or the braised
Or
dish.
the braised dish.
I love your podcast and the episodes where you mentor new cooks. I love that. Where can we find it?
Thank you so much. So you could find me, the podcast, anywhere that's Chef's PSA. So Apple, Spotify, etc., YouTube. And then on social media, anything Chef's PSA, that's me.
Wonderful. Well, we'll follow you if we don't already, Chef.
Thank you.
Yes.
And we absolutely love to hear from you. So if you have any feedback, requests, questions, or just want to opine on anything that you heard today, please email us at eatdrink@dallasnews.com. We're going to take a short break. And when we come back, Sarah has a recipe that she's been wanting to share with us since Easter.
Central Market is really into food, like fish flown in so fresh it still has jet lag into food. Our sourdough starter has been around since grunge was a thing into food. We're talking more prime cuts than a greatest hits album into food. Central Market is really into food. If you are too, then we're the HQ for you, whether you're a make every recipe in the cookbook foodie or a my favorite recipe is reheat type who just digs the delectable. No place makes every day more delicious like Central Market. Really into food. Shop now at centralmarket.com.
Welcome back. Before we share a new recipe Sarah is excited about, we have an ask for you. We're looking for easy summer recipes from you. If you have a cocktail or simple meal, we want to hear about it. So send them to us at eatdrink@dallasnews.com and we might even call and use you on the podcast. Okay, Sarah, you have been like really, really excited to share more about this recipe to the extent I think I might make it this weekend.
I want to tell everybody about a gluten-free carrot cake I made on Easter as a person who very happily eats all kinds of gluten. I made a great carrot cake with the flour I never wanted to use.
What flour is
So
that?
I used Bob's Red Mill gluten-free 1-to-1 baking flour. And the story is I wanted to make a carrot cake for Easter because I have little kids who like a themed anything. And a holiday is a great time to make fun food with the kids. And my older daughter is a pretty good baker. We both agreed, let's make a carrot cake. And then we realized we were sharing Easter with 2 different family members who have a gluten allergy. So I was like, here's the situation, babe. We have to make a different kind of cake. And mom's not really that thrilled about it. And so I pulled up at the request of lots of people. I ended up making a carrot cake from the website elizabethandbutter.com. I don't know Elizabeth.
Or
But
butter?
No, I know butter. I do know butter. And I'm going to show you guys a picture of the way the cake is supposed to look. And then I'm going to show you a picture of what I made. And I want you to tell me if I did okay. Here's Elizabeth's cake. You know, a tiered carrot cake.
What is on top?
It's homemade caramel on top and crushed pecans. Here's my cake.
Oh,
Not a professional baker, but it's not terrible.
no.
I
Right?
also think that the abundance of pecans you added is sensational. I love pecans.
Well, okay, so what the listener can't see is that there's sort of a half moon of pecans on top of the cake. And we did a little more than it called for because there's a little bit of a caramel drip conundrum. And we just covered some of it with pecans. But I just want to say that we made a 3-tiered carrot cake with flour I wasn't familiar with. And it turned out to be the most moist cake we've probably ever made. And we actually got it out of the cake pans without a lot of yelling. Nothing fell apart. We made homemade cream cheese frosting that went in between the layers and all around. And then we did our best following some Instagram videos to like put the icing all the way around it to make it look cool. Made a homemade caramel and then did the caramel drips on the top and then fixed the little inaccuracies with crushed pecans on top. And we will make this recipe gluten-free by choice forever.
One, kudos on pastry. Pastry is a different animal.
Thank you.
It is very, very difficult. Beyond the fact that it was moist, one of my favorite food words, what made it special? Was it different than a regular carrot cake? What made it sing? Why do we like this beyond, carrots and cream cheese and sugar?
Yes. So it was my first successful layered cake. I also let an 8-year-old do about 75% of the job and it still turned out, which is like anybody listening, if you have a couple little helpers at home, the help is sometimes not helpful. And she helped in ways that were really, she made the frosting all on her own in the KitchenAid mixer, and she made the caramel all on her own, even to where like we got to talking about different shades of caramel and how far you take it and how far is too far. And my 8-year-old had watched all these baking shows and watched some caramel fails. So she set me up in advance. She knew how to go about not doing this wrong. And she was right. Like television taught her how to do that right. It was amazing.
I love it. You know what? Even though we don't have a gluten allergy or something like that at home, we use that flour. We
do?
love it. Yeah. My wife, she makes this beautiful banana cake with that because it doesn't make you feel bloated after that.
Does anybody know, like, is this flour better than regular flour? Does it make it more moist? I really don't know the answer to this, but now I'm like, if I make this with the regular flour in my pantry and it's not as good, I'm going to be really let down. So we're now gluten-free carrot cake people for life.
Yeah.
The main thing I know about this one is that it 1-for-1 goes into another recipe. So you can use a gluten recipe and use this flour. You've got to be real careful though with the flours that you use because people's bodies are not used to them. And so you just have to be careful if you're using a tapioca flour. Like there's certain flours that people's bodies just aren't used to. This one does not have those effects. And I just say that because, you don't want to be the recipient of a gluten-free disaster.
No, you
in
really
your stomach.
You really don't. And everybody at this table probably feels this way. I certainly do not cook for a living, but I know enough about food in my day job that whenever I take food anywhere, it can be a cake, it can be queso in a crock pot, it can be a real dish. People are like, oh, you brought food. And I'm like, guys, I'm not a chef and I've never been one. And yet the standards feel high. So I couldn't take a gluten-free carrot cake to Easter and have it not be good. And we also spent like 5 hours on this thing because of course it was 3 layers of carrot cake and we only had 2 8-inch round pans. And so another family would just go buy another one. But instead I was like, no, we're just going to do 2 rounds of baking cakes. So like we baked 2 and then you have to let it cool. Then like we filled that third one with more cake batter and had to bake it again. The efficiency here was really lacking. But I'm proud of it, and I recommend a carrot cake, not just for Easter. We'll be making it probably year-round. You can find the recipe on elizabethandbutter.com, and it's Elizabeth with an S and not a Z in the middle. And you just Google carrot cake with her name. And it's not a GF recipe, but I added that 1-for-1 flour to accommodate our guests.
And is butter spelled regularly?
It's butter like we've always known butter, babe.
And that's all the time we have for today. If you have an easy summer recipe to share, email us at eatdrink@dallasnews.com. And we don't want you to miss an episode. Make sure you're following Eat Drink DFW wherever you find podcasts. Special thanks to our producer, Julie Fisk. For the news, I'm Anna Butler. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.
Eat, Drink, DFW from the Dallas Morning News is made possible by Central Market.